Thank you for joining Leveraging State and Local Relief Funds to Increase College Completion Rates, a webinar co-hosted by Results for America, SHEEO, and the Institute for College Access and Success. My name is Shannon Serrato, Communications Director at TICAS, and before we begin, I want to highlight a few items. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available to the public following today's event. There's time for Q&A at the end, but if you have a question, you can submit it at any point using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And finally, if you require technical assistance, please contact TICAS Senior Comms Associate Angelique Palomar. Her contact information is in the chat. And with that, I'll hand it over to TICAS President, Samir Gadkari. Samir, take it away.
Thanks, Shannon. Hi, I'm Samir Gadkari, President of the Institute for College Access and Success. And we are so excited to have you today for our conversation about how states can use relief funds to increase college completion rates. We've been really thrilled with the reception for this event. We had nearly 200 people register, and we've seen people from everywhere from Alaska and California to New York. We've seen federal, state policymakers, college leaders, program leaders, funders, all registering for this event. And I think it speaks to the broad interest in how we can work together to help more students achieve their dreams of graduating from college. Special thanks to SHEEO and to Results for America for co-hosting this event with us. And thanks to the TICAS team for putting it together. I want to say that we are building on a decade of work here around what it takes to help students achieve their college dreams. We have seen more and more programs go through the process of getting evaluated to help us understand that. And that work has never been more critical. 4 in 10 students who start college don't complete. And we know that there are severe racial and economic disparities in who gets a college degree, with attainment rate gaps widening, unfortunately, over time. Fortunately, we have proven programs that can help. TICAS runs a community of practice of 7 RCT and emerging RCT programs that have shown that they know how to get students across the college finish line. All too often, college leaders face a choice between adding resources without knowing how much they might help individual students at scale, or achieving deep impact, but only with a subset of students. And ultimately, given the many public benefits of helping more students get across the college finish line, we need governments to invest in these programs so that students can achieve their dreams and the public can benefit from having more college graduates. We were very gratified to see that the Biden administration proposed $110 million for these evidence-based programs. And we're excited to talk today about how state and local governments can invest their resources in helping more students achieve their college dreams. Let me turn it over to Kelly McManus, a longtime champion for these programs and for this work. I'm currently the Director of Higher Education at Arnold Ventures. Take it away, Kelly.
Great. Thanks so much, Samir. And thank you to TICAS and SHEEO and Results for America for co-hosting this event. I am thrilled to be here with you all, and want to say before we get started, I'm going to give some very quick intros to both our keynote speaker up front and our panelists. But my words and my short sentences can never, encapsulate all of the great work that they've done. So I would encourage you to look at the TICAS website to get their full bios, and as well as that's where the video of this event will be afterwards. So with that, as Samir said, this is an exciting time. There is momentum building for investment in evidence-based interventions. And we want to start off by hearing directly from one of the alums of one of these great programs. Rachel Jerome is going to start us off today. She is an alum of the CUNY ASAP program and is currently working as the early engagement coordinator for ASAP at the Queensborough Community College. So Rachel, I will send it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak in front of you all today. My name is Rachel Jerome, and I am an alumni from the ASAP program from Queensborough Community College in Queens, New York. My decision to go to a community college and be a part of the ASAP program is single-handedly the best decision I could have ever made in my educational and career journey. When it was time to apply to college, I felt extremely ill prepared and I was intimidated by the college process. At the time, I needed to make sure I was making the best decision for me, and taking on a significant financial burden was not a decision I was willing to make. When I was in high school, my dad passed away, and my mom became the sole provider for our family. So I needed to make sure that I was taking those decisions into account. And I'm also a twin, and I have a twin brother. So take the significant cost of college and double that, and that was it was a very difficult decision to make at the time. Luckily, my older sister was a part of the QCC ASAP program, and I knew about the options that I had in front of me to be a successful student. And I would be the only student in my high school walking around in a hand-me-down QCC ASAP t-shirt, and everyone would be very confused about my enthusiasm about going to a community college due to the stigma around it. But little did they know what was going to be in store for me over the next few years. The ASAP program provides students benefits like financial benefits like an unlimited Metro card, tuition assistance, and money to cover textbook costs. And these played a huge role in alleviating the significant financial burden of going to college. I could then put the focus solely on myself and in my education. The benefit that I believe I significantly was impacted by was the academic advisement and support services, because it molded me into being a self-sufficient college student that would be more comfortable in advocating for herself when it came to transferring to a four-year college. ASAP also offers students with a bunch of working opportunities in student internship positions such as peer mentorship and student ambassador. I happen to be a student ambassador in my first semester of the program, where I worked alongside the recruitment team, and I also worked in other facets of the program as well. This molded my career development skills as well as gaining work experience in the office. And when it came time for my internship to come to an end, the program welcomed me in with open arms to continue working part-time as a college assistant. So I can continue to be a part of the ASAP community even once I graduated and transferred to my four-year school. I'm thankful and grateful to announce now that I am the early engagement coordinator full-time for the program at the program that I graduated from, and I can continue to support students that are now pursuing their associate's degree at Queensborough as well. I'm also pursuing my master's degree in higher education administration at Baruch College in New York City. So ASAP has made such a huge impact on my life and in my family's life as well. I'm extremely grateful for all the opportunities they've opened for me, and I do believe that all students should have that same experience when it comes to going to college. Thank you so much, Kelly. I will now pass it off to you to continue the panel discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. I think you should let us know when you have your master's and are looking for a job. I think that we, all of us here, would love to have you and your passion as a part of our organizations. So to get started with the panel discussion, to kind of dig in a bit more to some of these programs, and also in particular, how they are funded and how we are able to leverage this moment to really expand the impact of evidence-based interventions. I have an all-star panel with me today. So to start, we have Leilani Mercado, the Chief Program Officer of Project Quest. We have Roger Lowe, the founder and CEO of Colorado's Education and Economic Mobility Initiative. And we have Dr. Shun Robinson, the Vice President of Access and Strategy for the University of North Carolina System, which is North Carolina SHEEO, and which is a very busy state this week, getting ready for basketball this weekend. So we'll start there. I want to start with you, Shun, talking about kind of the overview of the project that y'all are working on. Right now, y'all are working on an expansion of the CUNY ACE project in North Carolina. Can you tell me about that partnership and with the governor's office and why you decided to pursue that effort?
Sure. Thank you, Kelly, and thank you for joining us today. Here in North Carolina, our governor, Governor Cooper, directed $5 million to the UNC system from the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, so the GEAR Fund, to help our current and former students who are at least 50% towards their degree complete those degrees. And these funds, they could be used for student outreach, for advising, to make grants to address unmet financial need, just anything to help these students on their path to graduation. And we are very thankful for Governor Cooper's advocacy for these students. Around the same time that we were thinking of ideas on how to use these funds, we had a conversation with Arnold Ventures and CUNY about the ACE program. So ACE stands for Accelerate, Complete, and Engage, and it's the 4-year version of the CUNY ASAP program. We were definitely intrigued by some of the preliminary data that they'd seen from the CUNY 4-year institutions who had already implemented the initiative. So the stars aligned and we allocated $2 million from the GEAR funding for this effort. We're partnering with 3 of our institutions, Appalachian State, UNC Greensboro, and East Carolina University, to provide the ACE program, personalized advising and career development services, financial aid, and textbook assistance to transfer students. We're really excited to be the first 4-year system outside of CUNY to implement the program. I will say we have some experience implementing evidence-based initiatives with our partner institutions. We currently have the Student Success Innovation Lab, where we provide funds to our institutions to implement or scale innovative student success projects. We pair those practitioners with faculty members from other institutions who assist the teams in planning and drafting proposals and now oversee the evaluation of the projects. And so this program is the next iteration of our Student Success Innovation Lab. Our ACE program is called TRACE. So transfer, accelerate, complete, and engage. And we're excited. We're in our planning year right now, and we'll begin our pilot year in the 22-23 academic year.
Great. That's awesome. I have so many follow-up questions there, but I want to hear first from Leilani. I'd love to hear about, I know Project Quest has undertaken a recent expansion. Could you tell us a little bit about the programs, the Train for Jobs and Ready to Work programs, and kind of what you're aiming to accomplish there?
Sure. So we're currently finishing up Train for Jobs, which was a program that allowed individuals that had been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and had lost their jobs due to layoffs or due to less hours. And so and this was part of federal funding that was provided to the city. We were part of a collaboration to really help individuals get back on their feet. Because of that, on November 3rd, 2020, there was a vote by the citizens of San Antonio to actually really put money into workforce development. And so a 1/8 cent tax that would have gone to something else in our city has actually been put into workforce development as part of that initiative. And that's $200 million that is going to be allocated over the next 4 years, with Project Quest being one of the programs that's going to deliver these services. And what it will do is allow individuals to get into job training, and for us to put the model, our Project Quest model, and what we've already studied to really help individuals get back on their feet, get the job training they need, and get into a living wage.
Awesome. Right. And Roger, turning to you, Colorado has also started down this path of using evidence of impact to drive decisions on state and local relief funds. Can you tell us about what's happening in Colorado right now?
Sure. No, and thanks, Kelly. This is an exciting discussion to be part of. You know, Colorado, like a lot of states, definitely spent some of these one-time federal stimulus funds quickly in the last session. And they also did something I think was really smart, which is they set up a task force, the Student Success and Workforce Revitalization Task Force, which was a big tent, very inclusive process, had a lot of leadership from 2- and 4-year institutions, employers, nonprofit partners, a lot of policy folks. And they worked for months. I, along with many others in Colorado, was involved in that process. They ultimately released a report in January. And I think a couple quick things on what the task force sort of identified. First, I think they did a really good job of naming the challenges we faced, right? They, among other things, said Over 40% of Colorado high school students who enroll in a Colorado post-secondary institution do not earn a credential within 6 years. And they talked about the equity gap underneath that, that Colorado actually ranks 50th in the nation in the divide between the percentage of adult Hispanic Coloradans, which is our fastest growing population here in Colorado, who have earned an associate or bachelor's degree, and the much higher percentage of degree holding non-Hispanic whites. And they also said something else, which I think just doesn't get called out explicitly nearly enough, which is, quote, too often across the country, public workforce training and post-secondary funding is not sufficiently focused on the approaches with the strongest evidence of effectiveness for learners, especially on long-term outcomes such as employment and earnings. And even more important than calling out those challenges is what they recommended. Among other things, they recommended that these one-time federal stimulus dollars be directed specifically at evidence-based programs. And they made that concrete and specific by tying it to a bipartisan statutory definition that already exists here in Colorado that really favors programs like ASAP and ACE and QUEST that are backed by randomized evaluations. And in fact, they specifically said on the subject of these post-secondary equity gaps in Colorado, that Colorado should, quote, rigorously evaluate existing and proposed initiatives to assess their impact on closing equity gaps, and then resource those efforts with one-time funds. And they specifically called out intensive wraparound supports that reflect proven practices that substantially increase degree and credential attainment for learners, and in particular, learners of color, learners in poverty, and first-generation students. And I actually can't think of a better example of what programs like that than ASAP, ACE, and QUEST. And they recommended some other things. They also sort of recommended making data more available to learners so that they can actually see, what their long-term employment and wage outcomes are. This is actually great timing for this discussion, because just this week, Governor Polis and a bunch of folks in the legislature announced the introduction of 3 bills that move all of those recommendations forward. And I think there's a lot more work we can do. I hope to see some of the bill language strengthened even more, but there's a lot of really good stuff in these bills that aligns very well with what I just listed. So if those bills are enacted, I think we're well on our way to making sure that some of these one-time stimulus dollars go to execute on that vision.
Interesting. And I saw what was happening in Colorado and was very excited that you would be here to tell us all about it. And so I want to dig a little deeper with you, Roger, because one of the questions, right now, especially the past 2 years with the pandemic, there have been just so many demands on policymakers, and it's been so hard to get focused attention on kind of any one thing. Can you go back a little bit? And you talked about this with the task force, but can you pull back the curtain a little bit and tell us, how were these issues best identified? What were some of the things that other advocates, policymakers in other states could use to really drive home the argument about why this makes sense to do right now?
Sure. Well, look, I clearly, like a lot of other states, there's a lot of competing priorities. And there are several task forces that are stood up on other issues like behavioral health and housing. A couple things are worth calling out. Colorado actually ranks 47th in public investment in higher education. And that, I think that's been identified increasingly as a crisis in our state and an affordability crisis. I spoke a moment ago about this, but we just have this massive equity gap. In terms of post-secondary credential attainment, that the task force report called this out in 4 or 5 different ways, but however you slice it, degree attainment and credential attainment for white Coloradans is just much, much higher than Coloradans of color. And that, although the state has taken some steps to address that, I think there was a real urgency, especially given, the disparate effects of COVID and of the pandemic, to really dig in on that. I think there's also, we've been talking for years about the skills gap. And I think in my view, it's never been starker. In Colorado right now, there's over 30,000 unfilled cybersecurity and coding jobs with an average 6-figure salary. Even before the pandemic, less than 1/3 of our healthcare workforce needs were met. And of course, in so many areas, including nursing, that's become, a really obvious crisis. At the same time, we have over 300,000 Coloradans of working age who are at or below poverty. And they're, more than 2x as likely as their neighbors to be people of color. So there's this disconnect, right, between this talent supply and the available jobs. And I think there's a lack of, when it comes to higher ed and workforce, there's just increasingly obvious need for new approaches, new pathways, and programs, frankly, that work to connect, those Coloradans with meaningful, good-paying jobs and pathways that actually yield a credential and a long-term ROI. There's something seriously wrong with the system where, in our workforce development and community college system, there's for too many Coloradans and Americans, they're not getting the outcomes that they need to fill that skills gap. And I think Governor Polis and the legislature really, to their credit, zeroed in on that.
Yeah, that's helpful. Sean, I want to go to you and talk about kind of some of the more mechanics of how y'all have set up both the ACE project, the TRACE project, and as well as some of your work with the Student Success Innovation Lab. How do you select the particular institutions that you are taking on these projects, the student populations that you work with? And if you had more funding, whether from the governor or from another source, and how would you look to do different kinds of things? Would you go deeper? Can you just talk through how y'all think about that from a strategic perspective?
Yeah, so to answer the first part of your question, for the Student Success Innovation Lab and for the TRACE program, we released RFPs to our institutions. And so we did that for the TRACE program last fall. All of these programs, they're not one department programs, they're not one division programs, they're university programs. So it's important that proposals show the buy-in and commitment from everyone involved, from the provost to the enrollment managers, institutional research officers, because data is really important. Everyone needs to be dedicated to the success of these projects. For the TRACE program, deciding on the student population was pretty easy for us. Our president, Peter Hans, he was previously the president of the North Carolina Community College System. He calls himself our transfer president. And we know how important transfer students are for the success of our system and for the health in the state of North Carolina. Community college is the first step for so many low-income students, first-gen students and students of color. So it's important that we build strong pathways to our four-year institutions for these students who come with great aspirations. With additional funding, we would do all of those things, Kelly. We'd help more students, not only at the 3 partner institutions, but our other institutions across the state too. Transfer students, they're a growing population for us. And so we want to do everything we can to make sure that they're successful.
Leilani, a question that comes up for me, both Roger and Sean were talking about the use of the ARPA money, a lot of the COVID relief money. What was different was that, the citizens of San Antonio voted for a tax increase to support workforce development. Can you just talk about kind of how San Antonio came to understand the need for this? Like, how was this argued for? Kind of how did y'all get this done?
So, real quick, it wasn't a tax increase. I want to be clear because people will just pass out if it's it was actually a tax that was a 1/8 cent tax that is basically, instead of being geared to something in the city, it was going to be geared to specifically workforce development for the next 4 years. But Quest is celebrating 30 years this July, and one of the major impacts or the major grassroots organization is COPS Metro Alliance, and these are volunteers that continuously speak to local officials and say, these are the things that you need to be thinking about for those that have no voice. And these are individuals that are in poverty. San Antonio is still one of the most economically segregated cities in the United States, which is amazing, especially since we're like number 7 of the top major metropolis cities. And to have that much poverty in certain sections of, and literally, if you look at a map and you cut San Antonio in half, you literally have top part that is affluent and it has money, and then the bottom half that doesn't. And COPS Metro and many of our political affiliates and the community believes that after COVID-19, we have to be better than this, right? And so we're ranked number 2 or 1 now or something against Detroit of being the most poverty, having the zip codes with the most poverty embedded in them. And that's because individuals don't have jobs. They don't have a high school diploma or a GED. They don't have basically the means to go to, or jobs or housing. There's just so many issues. And if we don't really truly invest in our community, then we are never going to continue to grow, and our individuals that live in our city will not be able to grow. So the city, along with grassroots organizations, along with political will, is what really allowed for this, and they got the vote. And this was literally a vote on November 3rd, 2020. The citizens voted unanimously. This is what we want to do, and we're going to direct these funds to workforce development. And so that is an initiative that I think hopefully other cities will take on and say, this is something that's important to us, especially when you unwrapped or unveiled the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, San Antonio is a hospitality community. And so the jobs were just not there, and people didn't have the skills, and we needed to do something to help them.
So I want to remind the audience to start putting your questions in either the chat or in the Q&A, preferably the Q&A, but wherever you find your way, so that we can make sure that we can get your questions answered. But I think a lot of people are probably on this webinar really interested in the finances, and particularly long-term sustainability of these programs. We know that there's a lot of upfront cost. There is an opportunity now with ARPA funds, other resources to meet some of those needs, like Governor Cooper is doing in North Carolina. But I'm curious at how y'all are thinking about sustainability in the long run. And Leilani, let's start with you. How are y'all thinking about funding kind of your expansion moving forward?
Sure. So we have been, again, in existence for 30 years, and we've been fighting this fight for about 30 years, basically. And it's how to make your organization more multi-funded, right? So we have federal dollars, we have state dollars, we have local dollars, we have philanthropic dollars. And honestly, that's what we have to continue to do until really the federal government and the local, they all work together and say, we're going to put and align workforce development dollars to cities. And only through this initiative, we're doing it right now, but this is not the norm, right, to put this much money into workforce development until we make a really hard decision and say it's going to be part of our budget as a federal government, as a state government, as a local government. Then I don't think that you're going to have the opportunity to really diversify your funds and have those types of resources. It needs to be change in legislation to really put those dollars toward that. Otherwise, we're fighting for the same dollars, right? And I think right now this collaborative is allowing us to really work with our community college and not fight for the same funds. We're doing it together. And I think that's some of the issues I'm sure that Roger and Shun are going to share, is that it's just difficult because it has to be a primary initiative for our funders and our government to say, this is an initiative we have to invest in our people to really provide opportunities for our country.
Shun, I'm curious, what is North Carolina thinking about long-term sustainability here?
Yeah, so right now, of course, we're using the $2 million in the GEAR funding to support the first year of the implementation. We're also thankful that we have support from Arnold Ventures. They're covering CUNY's technical assistance support and the evaluation costs for our faculty members. This is a 3-year project, so we will need additional funding to cover the additional years of the project once the GEAR funding expires. And so we started fundraising for those additional years, and we've received support from our friends at the ECMC Foundation. Beyond that, we're already thinking with sustainability in mind. We hope that this project helps our institutions think innovatively about how they deploy the student support resources that they already have for transfer students. Also, because we're a system office, we can use those evaluation results from the study to think about policy or funding changes that will allow our institutions to invest invest more in what works. We hope that this gets the interest of our General Assembly. We'd love to think about how we address this program with our community college friends so that they can do the CUNY ASAP program. There may be an opportunity for us to go in together and think about how we get resources from our General Assembly. And we can, of course, think about how we share the successes of these programs with our other institutions and help them think differently about how they support transfer students.
Great. Roger, I know y'all are in a different place, but I'm sure, good policy, you've got to think long-term. How are y'all thinking about sustaining what hopefully moves forward in Colorado?
Look, I mean, I think the thing about sustainability, especially in a state like Colorado that has some very real long-term structural fiscal challenges, as anyone involved in the higher ed system will tell you, is, I mean, there aren't easy answers here. I mean, anyone who says there's an easy answer just isn't being straight on this point. I mean, this is hard. Sustainability is an issue, especially in a state like Colorado. I think I would almost reframe it a little bit. There is never going to be another opportunity like this, at least in the next few years. I mean, these are one-time dollars, and shame on us if we don't, at a minimum, leverage these one-time dollars to pilot and build, evidence-based models that do have a long-term ROI, right? And I don't think we can do that with the guarantee that they're going to, that sustainability is going to be solved. But what I do know is, continuing to, to sort of stretch dollars and try to fund programs that aren't as evidence-based in some cases is not a good strategy for our students, right? I mean, there is clearly long-term dollars to be tapped there. We see this, in conversations with employers who are desperate for, talent and programs that fill, high demand industries like, IT and advanced manufacturing and healthcare and the skilled trades, and programs that meet those needs, I think will be able to leverage, private and employer and business funding. It's also true that, there are over 40 federal funding streams out there with a post-secondary, higher ed, or workforce component. I mean, this system is just massively splintered and siloed. And look, some of the folks in the chat are weighing in that there's people in Colorado that are just working really hard to make it work. But in a system that's that fragmented, it is really hard to sustainably fund a program like, an ASAP or a 1 million degrees or an ACE or a Quest that demonstrably improves learner outcomes, right? So I guess I see these ARPA one-time dollars as kind of the camel's nose under the tent, right? If we build some momentum, I think we have a much better shot of tapping, these formula funds, getting WIOA funds, getting, Perkins 5, career and technical education dollars, SNAP ENT dollars, TANF dollars, tapping employer dollars in the long run and making this sustainable. And by the way, philanthropy needs to be patient. Patient capital, right? Philanthropy needs to understand that when we talk about evidence-based solutions, we can't expect, these programs to scale across the country in a couple of years. Philanthropic boards need to stick with this and understand this is the long game and continue to fund these programs. And if they expect, if they're going to declare failure because the public sector isn't scaling everything right away, then they're not leveraging their dollars as effectively as they should be.
Duly noted. Heard.
That wasn't directed at you, Kelly. You all are patient.
No, I deeply appreciate that, because I do think that there is a very real tension here. And this actually was going to get to kind of my next question. And I know I've seen one question come through. I've got one last question, but please send some more. I think the question is, all of y'all have been, well, I should say, Leilani and Shun, y'all are operating programs that have been rigorously evaluated. That takes a long time to do and to build. And then Shun, in your case, y'all are replicating a program that has been rigorously evaluated. Can you just talk about, and maybe Leilani, I'll start with you, like the experience of why have y'all gone down the road of rigorous evaluation? Like what drove you to do that? And then Shun, how do you replicate and make sure that y'all are seeing the same kinds of results that ASAP and ACE have seen at CUNY? So Leilani, I'll start with you.
So many years ago, because our studies kind of dated now compared to the CUNY ASAP and some of the newer studies that are happening, we decided to do it because we wanted to show proof that workforce development, of course, programs work. We are still one of the only organizations that shows wage increase over time and showed it over a 10-year period of time, which I think is amazing. But it's, even though you have these programs that show proof, people still don't believe it. It's like, yeah, but it still costs a lot of money. And, why do you do? And so even though, okay, let me tell you, the return on investment that we just did a study recently internally of who our graduates were and their wages, it was $19.32 for every dollar invested in a project quester, $19.32. So it is, you do get your money back, not only through, individuals buying homes and purchasing and living differently and purchasing vehicles and purchase power, basically, but also because you're changing your community, you're educating your community so they have a chance at a better life. And so it's just a philosophy on how people imagine workforce development and what their beliefs are. And it's two beliefs, right? Help people that need the help and provide opportunities to help them, or I did it on my own and everybody should be able to do it. But we know that that's not true, because the difference was equity, right? Nobody was provided the same opportunities as someone else. And so those philosophies don't really work any longer. So I think that workforce development organizations like ourselves have to continue to show outcomes and have to continuously prove ourselves. And again, I'll agree with Roger, workforce development does not happen overnight. And so some of the already naysayers and for train for jobs are like, well, how come people aren't getting jobs already? You have all these people. It takes time. People are coming with different barriers. They're not at the academic level to start college yet. They're not quite ready. They still need to take prereqs. They still need to do all of these things. And Rachel, more than any of us that there's a lot of barriers in trying to go to school, and we know that. But our policymakers and our legislation have to understand how hard it is, because it's not easy to go to college. It's not easy to make those success stories.
Great, thank you. Sean, anything to add on replication and how you do that?
Yeah, so I think for us, having a planning year and a pilot year are both very critical to the success of this project. We have dedicated a lot of time to this already, our institutions have, and they're asking really deep probing questions to make sure that we have a successful pilot. And hopefully we'll get all the kinks worked out so that we'll have a successful study in the 23-24 and 24-25 academic years. We'll want to say that we have amazing partners, our friends at CUNY who are on this webinar today. They'll be walking with us over the next 18 months, sharing their knowledge and making sure that we're holding true to their model. We're on the phone with them every week, sometimes several times a week, and we couldn't do this work without them. Also, as you mentioned, the evaluation piece is so critical for us. And our evaluators, they're with us right now. They're not coming in when we're ready for implementation. They're walking with us right now because they understand how our policymakers, how our legislators, how our board of governors, they respond to data and they invest in good data that shows that it works for our students. So we are keeping our board members and our policymakers updated on this project. And so we want them to know about the successes and the challenges that we're having so that they can remove any funding or policy barriers when this program proves to be successful.
Awesome. And that actually, I think several of y'all's comments have answered in some ways one of the questions in the chat, but I want to throw it out there, see if anyone has any ideas. How do you get policymakers' attention if they're just not into it? They're just not interested in investing these dollars. Any words of wisdom in addition to what y'all have already said? Lilani.
Sure. So
go to Lilani.
You have to do it in several different ways, right? It's just like when you're applying for funding. You have to show the success stories. You have to put the Rachels in front of your legislators. You have to show return on investment. So dollars, money, they want to see like, what am I getting for my money? And then you have to show data. And it has to be in different, whoever you're talking to, they want to know all three. They want to know the heart, they want to know the funding, they want to know the money. But you have to basically demonstrate all the ways that your program works in order to get, you don't know what their agenda is, right? You don't know what their, it could be a story, it could be data, it could be money. And so I would say all three of those would be your top three to go to a legislator for.
I could say so much here, but just two quick things. I can't think of a better example actually than what Quest has done in Texas, the organizing they've done. We need that everywhere. And on that theme, I mean, those of us who sort of talk about evidence, we're too wonky. Usually we're in our ivory tower. We talk about, randomized control evaluations, RCTs. If we want these programs to scale, we got to go out there and organize, right? We got to go out there and build coalitions locally that show the value of these models and lift up voices in our community that really, just like Quest has done in Texas, to make elected officials care, because they're not going to care. They're not going to, I can tell you from the last year that they, just going in and talking about randomized control trials is usually not enough to get the job done. So we have to do a better job on this.
Great. Well, it is time for us to wrap up this panel. There was one question in the chat about how we better serve adult learners, and I will take moderator's privilege to answer. Like, go and look at what Project Quest is doing down in Texas as a first step. But I agree that we need to think more broadly about opportunities to reach that population, and I think that this is the time to be building out that research agenda. So we will have those conversations in a future webinar. But now I want to thank the panel for your time, and I want to turn it over to Michelle Jolin of Results for America.
Thank you so much, Kelly. This is an inspiring conversation. I really, really, really learned so much. And thank you all for joining us today to talk about the importance of prioritizing evidence-based interventions to support college completion. This work is so important to the lives of students across the nation. As states and local governments are deciding how to disseminate these once-in-a-generation American Rescue Plan funds, as we said, we're going to continue to push these governments to spend these dollars on the several examples that have proven to help students complete college programs. CUNY ASAP, as we talked about, Bottom Line, 1 Million Degrees, Project Quest, and others. These programs have shown significant results, and they need, states and local governments need to be spending their ARP funds on these programs and scaling these programs. I want to just also put a fine point on the fact that we know that it's critical for the long-term health of our country to be funding and scaling these kinds of programs and the kind of successes they're having. We know that more students who complete college, the economy will get a tremendous boost. In a 2019 analysis, Third Way found that if the same percentage of students graduate from college as from high school each year, tax revenue at the state, local, and federal level would rise by more than $90 billion. And so again, this is another thing that can help inspire public officials to be investing in the kinds of programs that will deliver these kinds of results that we talked about today. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate the interest in this work, and we are so grateful that you dedicated this time to listening to this important panel, and we're excited about the opportunity to continue to push for ensuring that all students have the opportunity to complete their college degrees. Thanks so much.